Perspective grids are an invaluable component of drawing backgrounds for animation, and even animation itself is heavily reliant on having proper perspective, yet the entire subject still remains a mystery to even our most studied viewer. Guys, how to get those perspective grid on Photoshop? Great question, love that. But you see, perspective is a vast subject that couldn't possibly be covered in one video on YouTube. Just kidding, it's going to take 5 seconds. This is not a part 1.
But guys, the grid is not very useful if you have no idea how to compose a shot, place a horizon line, design a composition, proper set dressing, proper lighting, all of that with atmospheric perspective. So let's do an episode about the perspective grid and all the other things. If you're new to BAM, it goes like this. You guys submit art,
And we guys redraw that art.
like it was a real animated show.
Linear perspective is based on horizon lines and vanishing points.
Once you place a horizon line and one or more vanishing points, you're ready to draw in perspective. Lots of animated shows that you see on TV use perspective because it adds a sense of realism by grounding it in a believable 3D space.
The perspective we use in drawing is called linear perspective, and it's a system developed by artists during the Renaissance era.
In 1413, Filippo Brunelleschi figured out geometrical perspective by painting the outlines of a building in a mirror, and by doing so, he discovered something. The parallel lines of buildings, if extended, would converge to a single point on the horizon line, known as the vanishing point.
Before this discovery, vanishing points were not fully understood. Artists would attempt to depict 3D surfaces, but had no clear concept of how receding lines should converge. Now, this all sounds really academic, but the truth is basic perspective is actually really easy once you understand the tools and how to use them effectively. Click the Shape tool and change it to the Polygon tool. Then edit the properties of the Polygon tool. Make it a shape with no fill and a 1-point stroke. Then make it a star with 100 points, and indent those points by 99%. Click the horizon line and drag the shape. You'll get the star shape thing with 100 lines that all converge to a single point. This is a 1-point perspective grid.
1-point perspective is useful for rendering objects that face the viewer. It's perfect for drawing a simple city street or a simple room. In 1-point perspective, a rectangular surface that's facing you will be made of horizontal and vertical lines. You can hold Shift to draw these, but the edges that recede need to follow the grid.
Knowing this, we can fix this Giotto painting. If I overlay the grid, we can see how the perspective of this room could have been improved.
Oh, you think you can improve art history?
Well, Giotto, maybe.
Yeah.
He's early Renaissance, dude.
Yeah.
1-point is simple, but there's a lot to understand about using it effectively. James emailed us his background,
bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com.
and it is a pretty decent execution of 1-point perspective. However, the composition is quite boring, and that's because the horizon line is placed too high. This is a problem I see with most beginner artists. This creates kind of a security camera angle, and we see too much of the boring ground. It really disconnects us from the space. Let's move this horizon line down, which will allow us to drastically change the composition of this piece. Now we can add more background elements like these buildings and make the overall shapes really dynamic to look at. Part of perspective as well is understanding lighting. So after my drawing is done, I'll paint some value underneath the line art. If we imagine our light source is coming from here, we can paint in a quick layer of shadows to help make this drawing read much better. I'll brighten up the back buildings as well to imply a bit of atmospheric perspective. Typically, as objects get further away from you, they become affected by the atmosphere, and they'll lose contrast and blend in with the sky.
Here's a BAM tip for you guys. Humans walk with their arms and legs offset. So make sure the legs are swinging opposite direction of the arms, not vice versa.
In 2-point perspective, if an object is not directly facing you, but still has vertical lines, the two surfaces will converge to 2 points on the horizon. So, how do we do this with our grid?
Now we have a 2-point perspective grid going.
The key to 2-point is, again, understanding where to place the vanishing points. Putting them very close together will create a wide-angle lens effect, which heavily distorts your drawing, and putting them far apart will create an isometric effect. Both of these are correct, but you need to choose the right position for your scene. Photoshop allows us to place our vanishing points wherever we want, even very far off the canvas, which is something that's much more annoying to do in real life.
Hey, here's another drawing by James, bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com. Very cool. But the horizon line is too high again, and the vanishing points are not well defined.
Yeah, let's fix this by lowering the horizon line a bit and drawing more background details to help establish a scene. Let's add some set dressing like weeds, cans, and newspapers, like real stuff that would be around a dumpster. Details like these will really help tell the story.
Let's push the line of action more in this character and make the silhouettes more clear.
Here's a submission by Zach.
bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com.
This one is great, but it's in dire need of set dressing. There's almost no details to tell us about the space. Typically, restaurants are loaded with all kinds of junk that really make the space feel lived in.
To make the character feel more impressive to these viewers, let's place them up high. Now, this perspective might look confusing, but it's actually a variation on the 2-point. Instead of placing our second point off to the right, let's place it somewhere up here, to emphasize that we are looking up at these shapes in our scene. And then we can tilt the camera as well, by making a grid of parallel lines, and then rotating them slightly. That's called a Dutch angle.
Take time to set dress your scenes properly. Objects can be placed in a scene to create interesting compositions. Just arranging objects evenly spaced like this is not very appealing unless you're drawing an Apple store. This layout is boring. Instead, group the objects together to create miniature compositions that are visually more interesting.
I'm going to increase the size of these characters and make them foreground elements. This will help frame our hero, making the composition more dynamic.
Vinny's drawing is great because the angle is very intentional. We're a tall person looking down on this rabbit, so a high horizon line is perfect. I'll use a 3-point grid for this one, one for each surface direction. A 3-point grid will yield the most dynamic drawings.
And we can use that grid to match our character. That way they will match the background. So sorry guys, even if you are a character designer, there are going to be times when you have to draw in perspective.
Not all perspective is linear. Sometimes in animation we may want a warped grid to mimic a fisheye lens. This will allow us to cram in more background information. In Photoshop, there are ways to tackle vanishing points like these. The simplest type of lens distortion is called a banana pan.
A more advanced version of this would be called spherical perspective. This is where all of the vanishing points are made of spheres, or parabolas.
Let's take a look at this piece by Brandon. Now, this is one of the best examples of perspective that has been submitted on the show.
Great job, bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com.
But I would like to take this even further. Notice the roads in the buildings are starting to curve back inwards towards the vanishing points. The artist is implying some warping, but I think we can enhance this. Let's add a spherical grid.
Use the ellipse tool and make a single ellipse, then duplicate it. Then change the width slightly, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat.
This is how I created the grid for our gas station background. However, in this drawing, I'll duplicate this grid and rotate it 90 degrees so that there are 4 vanishing points. And then of course, 1 point going down. I'm going to vary these types of buildings and their heights. This will be more interesting than a bunch of buildings that are all the same.
Real cities have variation.
Notice the distortion happening is stronger near the edges. If I wanted to, I could keep extending this background further until we reveal the horizon line. Then we can make a drawing like this.
You need to also add realistic infrastructure like water towers and air conditioners. These details help make the scene feel more believable, so take the time to draw them. I had some quick lighting in this scene to show the light is hitting the top of these buildings, and some gradients to emphasize the depth of this road. In 3D art, this effect is referred to as ambient occlusion. This is when the light can't penetrate the deep cracks of a surface. So now that you've got this arsenal of grids up your sleeve, how do you use them effectively?
The best way to utilize grids is to apply them midway through your sketching process. First, roughly draw what you want in a scene. Establish the composition and where you want the horizon line just by eyeballing it. Define the large shapes in your composition, and whatever small details that you think are important.
Then decide which type of grid to use, and then match that grid to your sketch. Then fix your drawing with proper perspective, while maintaining the composition that you originally wanted. Obviously, you could start out by just drawing with the grid, but that's kind of distracting and will most likely yield to some fairly stiff results because the grid is like kind of distracting. But that's just like my opinion, man.
You can use Photoshop cheats to help you draw certain shapes. For instance, ellipses can be placed on the grid and then warped into place using the free transform tool. Using a combination of Ctrl, Shift, and Alt, you can transform the points to align things to the grid.
You can also draw flat surfaces and then skew them into perspective, which is very useful for like windows and arches.
You can easily draw a staircase by figuring out the endpoints, then drawing flat steps and skewing them into place. Then just duplicate these parts, move them over, and scale them.
You can scale objects in perspective by moving the rotation point to the vanishing point. Hold Alt and Shift and then transform. This is very helpful if you need to move things further away from you or scale them in perspective.
To make simple lighting, identify a light source and use the polygon lasso tool to block out the surfaces which will be in shadow. Then add cast shadows by identifying the shape casting the shadow, and how that would interact with the topology of the object being affected by the shadow. You can add simple gradients by selecting an area with the polygon lasso, and then painting with a large brush with very soft edges.
As objects go away from you, shift their shading to make them have less contrast, less details, and blend in with the background more. Doing that will establish atmospheric perspective. So by combining composition, perspective, set dressing, lighting, and atmospheric perspective, you will be able to achieve convincing drawings for your animation or illustration. Hey you!
Me?
Are you tired of wasting thousands of dollars in art school? Well now, you don't have to! Introducing the BAM Animation YouTube channel. You can gain the knowledge and skills from professional designers working in the animation industry for free. All you have to do is subscribe. Just get a Wacom tablet and a copy of Photoshop and you are ready to learn.
So what if I want Max and Brent to redraw my artwork?
Just send it to bam.redrawmyart@gmail.com and they'll make an episode all about you.
Dear Brent and Max, attached is my drawing of my OC Balkimra. She's a 16-year-old goth wizard at Hogwarts studying the art of demon transformation. She's the smartest person in her class and sexiest with no weaknesses except that she's a half demon and has 2 different colored eyes and 7 very important tattoos and bracelets, and even though she's not a demon, she's also asexual and a POC and an amputee. Please animate her in your next video!
Great, when's the next episode?
Well, kind of like tied up with my class right now.
I'm teaching a class as well, and I'm working.
That's a lot of hours.
You're working too.
Yeah.
I mean, not next week.
No.
Not
That's too early.
Not after that either. Not.
So I guess maybe in between episodes you should just practice drawing.
Happy anniversary, Brent.
Oh, hey dude.
We've been doing BAM for 1 year.
Yeah, and you guys have left a lot of positive comments and we've learned from listening to you as to what you wanted to get from these videos.
It's really important to us to keep education free. You guys can all do this.
We really liked making videos for you and thanks for watching and being supportive.
Yeah, thank you.